So again, welcome everyone. Thanks, General Burt, for doing this. We spoke, I guess, not quite a year ago, but last time we did an interview from Space Force Association. You were the Director of Operations at the headquarters in the Springs. Now you're the Commander, Combined Forces Space Component Command, U.S. Space Com. You also have another hat as a Deputy Spot Commander. But particularly for our listeners that are outside the military, how would you say these two roles between, the DO previously and your role now differ or complement each other?
No, thanks, Dan. And it's great to be back here with Space Force Association. And thanks for doing these sessions so we can get and talk the issues and get out in front of folks. The two jobs are very complementary to each other up front. I was on the ground floor as we stood up U.S. Space Command. I was in that last job for 2.5 years, which was amazing because I got to see the new combatant command stand up from the ground up and help participate in that as a service component. And so it was really eye-opening to me. So I knew the background and the history of U.S. Space Command and where it started and how we got to where we were. So to come out here now and get the privilege to be the commander at the Combined Forces Space Component Command, I got to bring all that history with me and understand where we are. So it makes it a little easier when we're working through issues or things with the staff and where we are in development of U.S. Space Command, that I saw some of the initial origins and how it happened and how we got here. So it's been very helpful for me to pick up the stick and start running pretty quickly out here. It also helps that I was formerly and now what is headquarters SPOC as the S36, because now I'm the deputy to General Whiting as the headquarters spot commander. So I keep my toe in the service side and I'm able to, when I'm having ops issues from an organized, trained and equipped perspective, I'm able to feed him very quickly. And we work as a combined team to answer the concerns, at least on U.S. Space Force systems, very quickly back to General Dickinson when things are having outages or anomalies or issues. So it's been a great tag team and coming from the staff, I know most of the staff members as well. So I know who to go to pretty quickly to get help. So it's been a win-win to come out here and to have those dual hats and be able to work both sides of that. But I think what's really interesting, and all of us as operators always like to do ops as compared to staff. I mean, come on, really, we all want to be ops. And it's great to be back here after being here from 2006 to 2008 and see how far, when I was here before, what was the Joint Space Operations Center has now become the Combined Space Operations Center and where we are. And really, the missions haven't changed since I was here from 2006 to 2008. They've just gotten more robust, and the relationships with the partners and the commercial companies has just gotten deeper. And that's been amazing to see because it's increased our capability across the board, because we don't go space alone. It comes across both with our coalition and our commercial partners and civil entities of how we get the job done in the enterprise. So it's been great. It's also been great to see the maturation of support in the theater with the directors of Space Forces and now with U.S. Space Command's integrated planning elements. Both of those elements out in the field have really taken it to the next level of integrating space forward, and both obviously to General Dickinson as my U.S. Space Command boss, that is critical to do to support his fellow combatant commanders, but also on the service side for General Raymond as he looks to build, as he's talked about, a purpose-built force to get after the issues should a war extend into space, and how do we best integrate those. So I think on both sides of the house, that integration has been important. And as we both go, both Space Command and U.S. Space Force, into our second year for both commanders, is to continue to ratchet up that engagement and the multi-domain ops.
Awesome. Awesome. Great answer. It sounds like you're happy to be where you are. Lovely California and doing ops. That's fantastic. Now, I hate to quote you, but last time we talked, you said that warfighting is warfighting. But you and I both know the space domain and command relationships for U.S. Space Com with the other combatant commands can be unique in that the vast majority of the capabilities that you're commanding are provided through your command and not deployed, for instance, at a geographic combatant command. Can you talk to the difference so that the audience can better understand really why space is sometimes different? And I mean, we obviously want to integrate and normalize, but in some cases it's just different and there are things you can't get around. Could you talk to that a bit?
No, absolutely. Good question. I would say I always say that General Dickinson is what I would call a hybrid COCOM. And what I mean by that is he's a hybrid between being a geographical combatant commander and being a functional combatant commander. So he does have geographical responsibilities in the UCP. It says anything from 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface to infinity is his area of responsibility. So he does have a geographic AOR that has been defined in the UCP language. But he also has that functional responsibility to support and provide space effects on behalf of all of the other combatant commanders, as you mentioned, very similar to SOCOM and CyberCom and TRANSCOM. So he is a mix of the two. Where that really happens here is CIFSIC is really focused on, Combined Forces Space Component Command is really focused on how do we bring combat space effects to the tactical edge, working with those combatant commanders in support of their operations and making sure that those space capabilities that they rely on, both for the American way of life and the American way of war, are always available and at their highest accuracies and capabilities. And so how do we make that happen every day? And then do that in conjunction with our coalition and commercial partners to provide the best space effects. So there may be opportunities on the coalition or the commercial side to provide those capabilities. When we really talk about his geographical AOR, again, I would say that I am a supporting commander to who is the supported Ops Center, which is the National Space Defense Center. They are charged with, the JTF Protect and Defend is charged with protecting the assets in the domain. So it's important that we kind of delineate between the two Ops Centers of how we're doing that. There's obviously some seams when we talk about space domain awareness. How do I make sure that we make sure that both centers do that? Space domain awareness has been a shared operation with both our commercial and our coalition partners. We have 120 space sharing agreements for data going back and forth for SSA data. So how do we help both the CIFSIC command as well as JTFSD in the prosecution of their missions? So that is a seam that comes across both of us, but that mission for space domain awareness belongs to me. The second piece would be when we talk protect and defend in the domain, you get to a point where you're going to have in the future, how do we talk about when I have a defender or I have a capability to defend a resource on orbit and when I don't have a defender on orbit? When there's not a defender, I'm really responsible, as is any other high value asset in any other domain, to protect myself, right? And that's make myself look skinnier, make myself quieter, make myself a harder target. How do I do that? Our forces and our units in a warfighting domain have to think about that every day down into our delta levels. And they are absolutely getting after that in space flags and on the organized training equipped side, those training events to get after that. But I think in JTF Protect and Defense lane is how do we work that dance between a defender and a defended asset, and moving forward in the future, how's that going to work? And that's where I think the other side of the mission of warfighting comes in. But we have to be hand in hand between the two Ops Centers to execute both of that, because we don't do protect and defend of space assets for space's sake. We do those in order to make those capabilities available to continue to support the multi-domain fight that's happening here on Earth. I think over time, what's going to happen, especially as humans start to go out into space, whether that be with our civil partners with NASA going to the moon and Mars with Elon Musk, and as more humans begin to travel in the domain, again, how do we protect and defend and ensure safe passage of those human space travelers as they get out and about? And so that will be a growing mission in the next 5 to 10 years, but we do have an eye to that for the future. And how would we do that? So there's a lot of excitement and a lot of growth in the warfighting mission that we have. But we can't lose sight of that the reason we have space is to provide space effects in order to engage and fight and win our nation's wars in the multi-domain fight. But if that fight comes to space, which is not beneficial to anyone, we need to be ready to fight and win. And that's really JTFSD's primary mission. And we are in support of that mission to them.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. A leadership type question. In our last conversation, we discussed how your experience with being a weapons school graduate and a School of Advanced Air and Space Studies graduate and joint assignments shaped your development as a leader and a warfighter. Now that you're leading a combined component command, how are you applying those experiences in this current role?
Well, I think, and you and I have had this conversation over many years, as you mentored me as your group commander and as we've grown up, is it's critical about relationships. And I think that's really the heart of when we talk joint multi-domain operations, is how do you understand the cultures and the capabilities of each of the services, and how do you figure out ways to work together and think creatively and innovatively together is important. And so being here, it's establishing those relationships with the joint personnel that we have on the combined space operations floor. It's how do we work with the coalition partners who are here, both as exchange officers and as coalition LNOs. You know, I think sometimes when we think about coalitions, we have this thought that everyone must come in and be a part of the team in the same way. That's not necessarily true. In a coalition, every nation is going to step to the table and provide great capability how their country is comfortable providing. And so we have to understand that as warfighters in that coalition environment. What does each country bring to the table? How do we best leverage their capabilities and work with them? And then in turn, how do we provide capability back to them? Because it's not a one-way street where they're just providing capability to us. How do we inform and help their growth and mission? And we've seen an explosion on the coalition side with space capabilities and really flight following, how they are building their own space capabilities in each of our partner nations. But it's about relationships. And then lastly, again, the commercial piece. We have the commercial integration cell here. I think everyone recognizes we need more capability. Commercial relationships have been critical, especially in the launch business, of reducing costs and helping us bring down what it costs to get to space. How do we do that now in the spacecraft arena and on capabilities on orbit? And again, those relationships and having the CIC here sitting side by side on the ops floor with us allows them to see the problems we're wrestling with. So know that these 9 companies come in and they're at the TSSCI level. They're watching us work problems and they're going, hey, I think I have something I can offer to that fight, or maybe I can help with that messaging. That has proven to be instrumental over the last year and a half as we've worked really hard towards standing up U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command to continue to robust our capabilities. So all my past experiences taught me to learn relationships, learn other people's stories and what they bring to the table and how do you best utilize them. And I see that happening day in and day out across U.S. Space Command, but particularly here at CIFSIC and the Combined Space Operations Center.
Yeah, I agree completely. Really great answer. Thanks, General Burt. If it's okay with you, we're getting a bunch of questions from the field. I'd like to throw one in. We got a question that says, who would be charged with protecting Americans traveling in space, such as the Inspiration crew that's going this fall?
Yeah, that's an absolute discussion that is ongoing right now at the U.S. Space Command level from a policy perspective. Again, because General Dickinson has been defined to have an AOR of 100 kilometers to infinity, I would say that at least the way the UCP language is written today, that falls squarely into General Dickinson's area of responsibility. And so those dialogues are ongoing of how do we protect and defend those. We talk about protect and defend of commercial assets, U.S. assets, when we talk about what's our critical asset list and our defended asset list. How would we have that same conversation about space travel and U.S. personnel, whether they be commercial, as within the SpaceX discussion, or with NASA, our civil government partner. So I think those are ongoing. That would be a greater discussion, I think, to have if you ever have a J5 or a U.S. Space Command or OSD policy person. But if I were answering that from a UCP only scenario, it's absolutely in U.S. Space Command's lane. And we're looking to how do we go after that. As you know, today we do human spaceflight support, both recovery of our own U.S. astronauts and how we work with NASA. Again, how would we take those current agreements when we talk about support to NASA? And the J5 is working how to benchmark off of those and create a further dialogue of how we would delineate those and move forward with those. But that's really what's in place right now that we would springboard off of, would be those human spaceflight support agreements that CIFSIC leads.
Outstanding. We got a question from the sole Space Force officer assigned to Joint Forces Staff College, Lieutenant Colonel Paul Whitmore. He's wondering, how can the Joint Forces Staff College best support you and your joint hat, in training and educating those officers?
No, absolutely. I would think we have been working very hard across the enterprise, and now I'm putting my service hat on to talk. We've been working very hard across the service enterprise with Space Force to increase the amount of space training that is occurring both at AU at Maxwell, working with Air University. Colonel Nikki Lindhorst is our space chair at AU. We have a space chair, Elle Gardner is at NDU. And so we've been working between the two of them to keep sharing courseware and how do we work across the joint community, across all the service schools to better improve space education and training, and more so in this case, education. And then when we talk about going and doing joint JPME to get your JPME 2 credit, again, how are we making sure that space is rolled into that courseware? I know J8 and at U.S. Space Command has been involved in joint training and how we're going to roll that out. We just got our J8 in place. His name, Mr. Thomas, I knew it would come to me. Mr. Thomas, our SES, just stood up that. He is amazing and getting after that. We've been using, I think you know, Colonel Lance and the National Security Space Institute has been doing a lot of that outreach with executive courses and how we would get after joint PME. So I would tell Whitmore to definitely engage with Colonel Lance and Colonel Lindhorst and look at ways to leverage courseware that's already been built to continue to build up those scenarios. And then, so that would get both after the joint and the service products that are being built that I think he could then leverage to improve the courses he's teaching there.
Fantastic. I hope that helps you, Lieutenant Colonel Whitmore. This question's from someone we both know, Chris Barnes. Sticking with the warfighting theme that we've been discussing, you know, despite the fact that the majority of our space capabilities are not forward deployed, some of them, you and I can think of a few, are required to be kind of in the footprint of a satellite in order to be effective. Some of the folks in theater who we worked for and with in the past have viewed those as nice to have and not necessarily essential. But it's my perception that that has changed over time. And Chris was wondering what you thought of that. What's the relationship, and how is the theater viewing warfighting space forces?
I think every day, I mean, I just sat through my ONI on Friday, and every one of the DER Space 4s, and if they're IPEs or co-located, sit in that with me. And then I go through, as the CIFSIC commander, I control not only Space Force units or tactically task, not only Space Force units, but also other joint units, both on the Army side, as well as GENWIC and other agencies. And so we have task forces for various elements like Task Force Space Domain Awareness, Task Force Space Electronic Warfare, Task Force Missile Warning. We have a variety of those task forces that kind of meld the joint units and the deltas from the Space Force side together in mission areas. So the COCOMs are all briefing with the DER Space 4s. The task force commanders are briefing how they're supporting. And to see the amount of operation, and the coalition SPOCs are also up on that, Canada, the UK, and Australia. So seeing that dialogue every Friday always warms my heart, because there's absolute conversation happening and space support requests coming not only from the combatant commands, but now also from our coalition partners. We've seen space support requests come from the coalition in support of operations that they are executing with us supporting them. So some amazing operations across the board that are occurring. I agree to Chris's point. Employed in place is tough to explain, but we're not the only mission that does that. So think ICBMs, remotely piloted aircraft. I would even argue B-2s, because they're so limited to a single base. There are many missions that fight from their installation, and that's their warfighting platform. I've also said in other forums, you know, there's a common statement in the flying unit, in the flying community: no one kicks ass without tank or gas. Well, I don't do space without HVAC, power, and IT, which is why cyber and acquisitions and intel all came to the Space Force when we stood it up, because we knew they were critical in the lifeblood to our mission to be able to execute. So I think everyone recognizes the capabilities that we are providing from stateside and around the globe to their missions every day, and they're becoming very demanding customers. The space support requests fly. We work really hard to give them everything that they need. For the things that are deployed, I agree. I hear Chris with people saying they're nice to haves, but I would tell you there are certain combatant commands right now who have capability, who we're talking about trying to redeploy, and they're holding on to them tenaciously. So I think the desire and need for space is, a lot of it has been education and seeing how we can help and support their missions. And I only see that growing moving forward, particularly in Indo-PACOM, because again, that's a long haul fight across a large body of water. And I've absolutely seen a lot of coordination, not only with CIFSIC, but as well as with JTFSD, and how we're looking at gray space competition with China and Russia, and how do we focus on that moving forward. So there's been a lot of work. So I'm sure Chris has been off. I know he was doing aggressor work and he's been doing some great things externally. But if I were to bring him back now in the Ops Center today and see some of the requests and the data on my Friday update, I think he would be well surprised of where we are today as compared to where we were even just a couple of years ago.
That's great. That's great progress. This question's from the handsome and powerful Ed Fienga. Haven't seen Ed in a while. He congratulates you on your continued success. He's asking, in your current role, what need or requirement or expectation from various consumers of our space capabilities has surprised you the most? Is there something that's kind of caught you off guard as to what the consumers want, and have those expectations really exposed any gaps in our capabilities or our planning or our resources?
I haven't seen, I would say, ourselves as consumers has really driven a lot of the priority of what to get after. So General Dickinson's #1 integrated priority list is space domain awareness and improving space domain awareness and command and control. C2 are his top 2 priorities. And again, it's how do we take legacy systems that were built in a peacetime domain in the past and get those C2 systems to talk to each other. So we are very much about ABMS and JADC2, C2 BMCS. How do we get to a multi-domain picture to bring everything together for the enterprise and the domain? And that goes to the Unified Data Library and the efforts we are making in space domain awareness with General Kreider on the service side. And how do we bring data and make it discoverable, available, and secure, and then apply it at the right classification level so it's on a pull scenario to answer whatever question you are trying to answer at the right fidelity. In a wartime environment, space domain awareness becomes critical to become an ISR function. How do I do targeteering and weaponeering? How do I understand intent and pattern of life? That is intelligence. That's not just, hey, where are you in the catalog at a point in space? And I think that has been the biggest demand signal from the consumers of getting after the space intelligence that is needed in order to safely and sustainably operate in the domain, as well as to understand intent of other capabilities that are being launched and how to best coexist with them, or if they are considered hostile, how we're going to deal with them. And I think that's been the biggest demand signal. The other piece that's coming is, again, as we talked about earlier, this human spaceflight. So we're going to go to the moon and stay in 2024 based on Director Bridenstine's announcement at Space Symposium a couple years back. When we do that, how do we continue to communicate with those astronauts, maintain custody of their safety and being able to be there? Any concerns or issues they may have, how do we quickly respond to those? How do we track them to and from traveling safely to the moon? Those are things we haven't done on a regular basis. So again, tracking human space travel in the domain is a demand that I believe in the next 5 to 10 years is going to blow up as well, of how do we track those things and ensure safety of flight, because now you have humans on board. So you're going to definitely, just like you do with the FAA and flying in the air domain, how do you ensure safety and that those humans can get to and from point A to point B in a safe manner without a loss of life? And so to me, that's the demand signals that I see coming are in space domain awareness and C2. How do we get to a digital service, flat, sharing machine to machine, automation, all the things that we've been saying on the Space Force side are exact, and why we purpose built that service are the exact things that the COCOM needs. And again, they have been the loudest customers, but it's the COCOM, it's U.S. Space Command. But I also believe that the second and third order effects of that data coming together in a consolidated multi-domain picture only helps the other combatant commands as well as they're dealing with the problems in their areas of responsibility.
Yep, great answer. Thank you. This question's kind of near and dear to my heart because the Space Force Association is started an initiative. If you're familiar with the Arnold Air Society in Air Force ROTC, we're building a Schriever society as well for space professionals. But this is a question from the field from Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Timberlake, who's an ROTC deck commander. He says, good morning, obviously. And he's asking what technical skills such as orbital mechanics or understanding the electromagnetic spectrum, things like that, would new officers, think college, ROTC cadets or academy folks, what skills would they need to be successful on day one in the Space Force? And obviously we're going to train them, right? But I think he's after what can they do in ROTC to help prepare future Space Force officers?
I think I am a product of Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's ROTC program, so definitely understood what that program looks like, and at least 100 years ago, and I graduated in December of '91, so it's been a while. But I think understanding across the board how the joint fight comes together. So there should definitely be academics on what is the Space Force. Again, I know Colonel Lindhorst is actively involved at AU that owns ROTC at the Home Center of what academics we are providing to ROTC and how we improve those. For schools that have very STEM focused backgrounds or engineering backgrounds, again, that's what we're looking for. So we've talked about how do we set up mentors like myself to be able to interact and do dial-ins with the students. So I tell the ROTC cadets to be demanding. We absolutely want to get out and integrate with cadets and talk to them. I think this is a way virtually with Zoom and other sessions, we could meet virtually with classes of students and let them ask questions about the service if they have questions and what's going on, and to give some briefings. But I know Colonel Lindhorst has been working that academics. To your direct question, I mean, again, orbitology is always important in understanding it. It's not intuitive because, again, there's the kinematics in space make it interesting, and Kepler gets a vote. And how do you explain that to someone and can visualize that? The same thing we talked about, understanding the frequency spectrums, space electronic warfare. The other piece I would say is also space battle management. So again, that joint fight, how would space data interact with the other domains, and how do other domains depend on space? So that even if someone in the ROTC class is going to be a pilot, I think it's important they understand what space brings to the fight. So it's not just about the space folks that are in ROTC that want to join the Space Force, but it's also about the other folks in the room. If they were to join another service or go to another Air Force specialty code, what does that mean to them, and how are they going to integrate space? So it's across the board that I think the whole class needs to get some space. But you're exactly right. We will steep them in a undergraduate space training in those capabilities and how they would best support those. And we will put them in one of those space power disciplines that we will track them in their career so they can become steeped in those operations. Again, we want good officers. We want people to think creatively. I would also say, I joke, it's a 3-year-old mentality, asking why. So when they come in the Space Force, clean slate as a new service, being a young lieutenant and asking why. Why do we do it this way? Could we do it this way? So it's not just asking why, it's coming with, hey, I see this could be an option to do it a different way. So not being afraid to be bold, as the chief has told us many times. And also any skills in digital, this generation really is much more digital than we ever were. I'm lucky to work my cell phone properly, but many of them with digital coding. We have this program called Super Coders. So we bring folks in and we're trying to get to where at the grassroots level, we can do software changes as we get to software-based driven systems and apps-based driven systems to get super coders down on the floor, being able to make real-time changes to those. So again, anyone who has excitement about coding or digital kinds of things, I would challenge them to keep driving on those classes and learn more about them, because again, we will absolutely be looking to apply those skills, and there will be opportunities once they come into the Space Force that we'll be asking if they have a background or a passion for that, for them to get involved there. So any advantage they can take of those classes and courses at their colleges would be value added as well.
That's fantastic. Thanks. General Burt, I'm mindful of your time. Are you okay with a couple more questions, or do you need to run, or
no,
you good
I'm
to
good
go?
with a couple more.
Okay, thanks. Two more. All right. I'm going to, then I'm going to use one that really gets you an opportunity to just talk about what's on your mind in terms of maybe what keeps you up at night. But as you've taken this job, you've been in the seat for a little while now. What are your goals in terms of what do you want to accomplish, in your tenure in this job, and what's keeping you up at night?
That's a great question, Dan, and thanks. There were really three primary things that I pushed at my change of command with CIFSIC, and I've continued to try to beat the drum on moving forward here. And the first is to be prepared. We need to be prepared, fight tonight for anything that is thrown at us. The threat is ever evolving. The enemy gets a vote. We need to be as smart as we possibly can on what's going on in the domain and understanding our weapon systems to the deepest level. And again, asking why. So when we have an outage, why did we have the outage? How long is it going to take to fix it? Why is it taking that long to fix it? What are all the steps in fixing it? We need to operate with a sense of urgency. Our nation depends upon us, as do our fellow warfighters in the other services. The second is to be threat focused and tactics driven. And that gets to the, knowing the threat, understanding the threat, and what does that mean to my weapon system? And how am I then taking that knowledge down to the tactical level and looking at how do I make myself a harder target? How do I fight through that threat? And what are the options that I have? And if I don't have it, how am I trying to use my system innovatively? So I think we've seen in every domain, I mean, who would have thought we're still flying the B-52 this many years down the road? Again, those airmen figured out a way to make the B-52 relevant to the current fight, and they've continued to upgrade and modernize it to be relevant to the fight. How do we do that with all of our space systems? We bring every taxpayer dollar out of them in order to win the fight and to fight through if challenged. So threat focused and tactics driven. And lastly, and we spent a lot of time talking about, is the growing solid partnerships, not only with our other joint partners, but our coalition partners and our commercial partners as well. There's a lot of great work going on at the leadership of U.S. Space Command J5 with our coalition. I just received a Japanese LNO who's here on the ops floor. We're working through finalizing. There are other countries on the horizon that are looking to send LNOs. We're trying to make sure we're sending them to the right place, working with J5, should they be at the U.S. Space Command level or down here at the CSPOC. And depending on the nation, again, the coalition gets to decide where do they want to best integrate. But at the leadership of J5 and working with U.S. Space Force and General LaCourie's team, we're going to make sure we have those agreements written properly, whether they're at the joint level or at the service level, to best integrate the coalition partners where we can. On the commercial industry side, we have we're working on our next partner, which is SpaceX, and we're working through the MOUs with SpaceX to be part of the Commercial Integration Center. I think everyone recognizes that SpaceX with Starlink is launching 400 to 500 satellites at a launch. So how do we continue to robust that relationship with them to best understand what they're launching, how they're launching, and to be able to work that safe passage through the LEO orbit as they start to proliferate with quite a few satellites. That's going to be important for all of our other launch operations and just operating again in a safe and stable environment in the domain. So a lot of partnerships and things that are going to continue to move forward. We continue to also try to figure out how to be the most efficient across the enterprise. I think you're going to see moving forward, both U.S. Space Force is looking at how do we force present. General Saltzman has been taking a lead on that, how we will force present to the combatant commanders from a service perspective. And then General Dickinson is also reassessing how do we force present from the COCOM to the other services, other combatant commanders to also best influence their mission. So I think on the near horizon here is the CIFSIC commander, again, those partnerships, as I got to keep the train on the tracks and keep providing those space support requests and answering the mail. As the organization and the presentation around us changes, we will adjust fire, but I cannot let the ball drop. I'm the fight tonight gal, and we're going to make it happen. And so again, I keep pushing partnerships and communication, and how do we be as transparent as possible about what we bring to the fight, so that as we make these changes and U.S. Space Command and U.S. Space Force go into their second year and grow and improve integration, how are we moving with that, but not letting anything fall off the table? So those are really my big three priorities that I gave the organization, and they have been responding gloriously and doing amazing things and continue to surprise me every day with what they come to work, passionate about their jobs and getting it done.
That's awesome. You not only answered my question, but Joe Guzman, I think she answered your question too about adding additional CSPOS partners and commercial folks. I'm going to give Trey York the last word, last question. Trey says the Joint Staff and the Air Force are reinvigorating electronic warfare. I think he's right. We've had task forces on this. We've done studies. There's been a lot of activity. The question is space electronic warfare plugging into all these efforts? And are we seeing an upsurge or reinvigoration of what's going to be happening from a space electronic warfare perspective?
Absolutely. Colonel Thien, who is the Delta III commander of the Space Electronic Warfare Delta, is knee-deep working with the rest of the Air Force and the other services on all of those capabilities, processes. General Gadecki was leading that for a while. I know they now have the electronic warfare wing down at Hurlburt or Eglin. I can never remember which base it ended up at, but PY has been fully engaged. We are also actively working exercises at the Pelias range and engaging in real-time exercises and looking at how that coordination happens. We continue to work at red flags with space electronic warfare and how do we continue to roll that in. Here on my staff on this, so that's PY's job on his service hat. He's working those, but then also on the joint side, Colonel Thien is my task force space electronic warfare. And so he is working with the Army and the other services with the space electronic warfare capabilities that they are presenting to U.S. Space Command for tasking. How do we then coordinate between in a joint domain? How would we provide forces or recommend COAs to General Dickinson across the enterprise? And that's through a space electronic warfare CONOP that U.S. Space Command in the J35 and working with the J5 have helped develop with the other combatant commands. So I think that area, electronic warfare is electronic warfare. And again, electromagnetic spectrum is critical to our business, just to fly satellites and to operate, but also in how do we counter the enemy's ability to use the electromagnetic spectrum in support of their space operations as well. So I think I'm very confident in Colonel Thien's team and in the joint team that we have under Task Force SEW that are getting after that. But we are definitely engaged across the board, both service and COCOM side on space electronic warfare. What I see that coming in the future is, again, it's going to continue to be a focus area. And what future capabilities do we need based on what the enemy is developing? And how do we see, do we want to continue to do that from ground-based? Are there other options, airborne, spaceborne? Again, electronic warfare, it needs to be done in resilient fashion and from multiple domains, just like we look at other things across the board. We don't just have one type of airplane, we have multiple. You have resiliency in many ways to get at the problem. I think moving forward in the future, what is our space electronic warfare architecture across the enterprise, and how do we build that? And that's really more in force modernization with Mr. Cox and his team in SSDP, or what is now going to be called SWAC, working on the U.S. Space Force side with General LaCorey's team and requirements at the headquarters staff of what is our investment in the future and where are we going to build in those capabilities. But it's absolutely informed by all those electronic warfare groups that are being led in the multi-domain fight at the Joint Staff.
Listen, you've talked to me twice in 48 hours, and no one should have to do that. But I really appreciate it. And on behalf of the SFA team, we really appreciate you doing this. I know you get asked to do a lot of things, and you can't do them all. But I think we got to a lot of questions from the field. We got to SFA's questions, and while they're sitting and probably hiding in the back, thank you to PA team and your CAG. Putting these things together is not necessarily easy all the time, and I thank them as well. But really appreciate your time, General Burt, and appreciate you doing this, and thanks for the great insight into the great job you're doing for the Space Force and for the nation.
No, thanks, Dan. I appreciate the leadership of the Space Force Association. Again, continuing to bring these topics up, get them out in a forum where we can dialogue about them, because I think, again, in any domain, they didn't start overnight. It's by a community, both of active duty, civilian, retirees. Everybody has a play in this, and we've been doing in the space business for a long time. But now with a separate service and a separate COCOM that we are building, purpose-built from the ground up, I think we have a lot of opportunity, and these engagements and interaction with the field are critical for us to continue to keep being those 3-year-olds, asking why and questioning how we do business and how can we do it better. So I appreciate all our industry partners and everyone who participates with us in getting after that.
Outstanding. Well, have a great day, ma'am, and thanks everyone for joining us.